have to protect him. All this horror that's come to my family, it's all because I couldn't love a motherless child.
You are a Stark. You might not have my name, but you have my blood.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So guys, of course you can tell by the title of the video, Game of Thrones, Bran Stark is the god R'hllor. He is the great Utter, and he is the Night King. So we've heard several theories about Bran Stark being the Night King, being several other figures throughout the history of Westeros. So let's talk a little bit today about some of the evidence and why it points to Bran being all these people. I think we're going to probably bring up some details that you probably haven't heard in other videos yet. So the first obvious clue is we get all of the Stark children, of course, down in the crypts of Winterfell. And all of the living children are there. We got Jon Snow, we have Sansa Stark, we have Arya Stark. But where is Bran Stark? Why doesn't anybody ask the question, why wasn't Bran there? Well, Bran is there. You know, he was that mist of ice. He was on the way because Bran is the Night's King, right? So how did this happen? How did it occur? So we have several theories about why many of us believe Bran may be the Night's King. You know, of course, the one theory that seems to be prevailing is that if we cut back to the scene where the children of the forest are about to create the Night's King, and he's tied to the weirwood tree, and they're using this blue crystal. Of course, that is the same color as the White Walker's eyes, right? Many people feel at some point in time, Bran wargs into this person in history and tries to somehow convince him not to be the Night's King, either by trying to lead him to another place or another area. Whatever the case is, the children of the forest still end up changing him to the Night's King. Now, here's where my theory is a little bit different. The prevailing idea has been that Bran Stark is in what they call a closed loop in time travel. And to understand what a closed loop is, that's basically when no matter, even if you can travel back in time or through time, no matter what you do, it won't change what was predestined to happen anyway. You can be an observer, but you can never change the timeline. That's what they call a closed loop. Then there's the open loop, where the changes you make in the past creates or echoed through the timeline, and there are changes and there are consequences to that, and there are paradoxes to that. And in some cases, there are alternate timelines to that, and there are several. So here's the thing, as we haven't been made clear as to what type of time travel Bran is able to do, if he's able to affect it at all. And some would point to the idea that the three-eyed raven makes that statement about the ink is dry. And I got a few comments about that. You know, the three-eyed raven had been mysterious from the from the get-go. So here's where my theory is a little bit different. And my theory is more of the alternate timeline, time travel concept, right? That's one that's a lot more popular these days than the kind of closed loop. The closed loop is kind of actually not very new. It's actually, I think the first time I saw the closed loop time travel used in cinema it was actually from a Twilight Zone episode, which is kind of interesting because George R. Martin used to write for the Twilight Zone. But in this old episode, it looks like it's about 1960s or something. There's a person who goes back to the 1800s to stop a fire and stop some people from dying. And he's actually part of a scenario of events that causes the fire. So that's an example of closed loop. So that's been done, but the alternate timelines one is more of the is I think more close to relation to what we deal with a lot today, especially with the idea of the multiverse. So a lot of that gets in the more modern day age gets pushed out there, where it's just all these different possibilities. And I think this is the one Game of Thrones. This makes more sense to me that they're stuck in. I'm going to explain why and how he then becomes R'hllor and the Great Other, and throughout this situation. So the reason that I believe that this is a alternate universe type of time travel Bran Stark is doing is because we get this the three-eyed raven who's been watching and waiting for Bran all this time. And what does that remind you of? It kind of reminds you of these time travel stories where people are sitting and waiting for you because it's something that happened in that timeline that needs to be changed. So somebody went back and somebody's watching you throughout the course of time to try to wait till you arrive to fix certain things that happens during your timeline that needs to be fixed, right? Or they get stuck in the past or something to that effect, right? And I think that's what's happening with Bran. I think Bran is many of these characters, and the reason I say that is because the three-eyed raven has knowledge of all these things, but we don't really know his backstory. I find it kind of strange. He just kind of exists and he knows all these things, and we never get the Game of Thrones television show explanation of who he is exactly and what is he waiting there for, and where's his origin story. We don't get any of that. We get the origin story of the Night King, though, but we don't get the three-eyed raven's origin story. And the reason that is because the three-eyed raven is Bran. It is a future version of Bran. It is a timeline version of Bran where Bran becomes an old man, right? And then there is a separate timeline where Bran as the Night King destroys the world. And so he's back there to try to stop that happening, right? So that's why it would have to be alternate timeline for that to occur, for him to be this guy. And if he's not that person, here's some other strange things that happened during his encounter with the previous three-eyed raven. As you recall, when he's destroyed by the Night King, he doesn't just die like a normal person, or the Night King doesn't try to raise him back from the dead or something like that. He kind of just dissipates into this energy or whatever it is and kind of downloads into Bran. Well, I think that happens too because he is Bran, right? And so he wouldn't be affected by death like a normal humanoid or being or something like that. So he goes back into Bran, but with key details Bran needs, and that's how come Bran through this is able to know the future and understand it and put it together more so than he was before, because the three-eyed raven downloads into him and gives him the information he needs now to go forward and in order to deal with the White Walkers destroying Westeros and the world. So that's why it would have to be alternate timeline, because what it would be is all these different versions of Bran going back all through history in attempts to stop them, and none of them seem to work for whatever reason. And so there is one that works, and the one that works is the version where he is the older version of Bran that has to now fix it, right? And he was in it, and the reason that timeline works is because he goes back, and in doing so, he sets that right. He gets to be the older Bran, but he dies there in the cave. So that's where Bran actually dies, in that cave. And then in doing that, at the same time, Bran is able to close the loop and go forward. Now, of course, the relation to R'hllor and the Great Udder. So if Bran at some point in history wargs into the Night's King, and he's stuck in the Night King, right? If we go back to the episode of Craster where he was putting out his children as sacrifices to be taken and converted into whites by the Night's King, this agreement that he was somehow able to even make and broker with the Night's King. And a lot of people ask the question, well, how was Craster able to communicate with them? Well, I think the Night's King, because Bran is in him, I think the ability to communicate with Craster was quite easy, because it was almost like he could send Craster visions. Through Bran's ability, he was able to make them aware, similar to how the Three-Eyed Raven was able to do it with Georgian, right? And so in doing so, he's able to, communicate that message. But my point was, Craster was referring to them as the gods, right? And the Great Udder, I believe, is the Night's King. And throughout history, people began to worship throughout their religions R'hllor as, or the Great Udder, I'm sorry, the Great Udder as their deities. Now, there are other versions of Bran that travel back and are trying to use fire to destroy the Great Udders, similar to when he whispered in King Aerys' ears, and many theories that he drove him mad in doing that, because, of course, Bran knows fire will destroy the White Walkers, right? So this is a kind of religious idea kind of based in Zoroastrianism, right? The religions of Westeros. Very similar to Zoroastrianism, where there are pretty much light and dark are the same thing. They're the components of the same being, and that's the thing with Bran. That's a similar thing what's going on with Bran. These are versions of Bran. Bran is some type of mutant, right? How else can you explain his time travel powers and all of that? He's some type of anomaly to the natural order of things. But in doing so, he's these different versions of him that have come back and trying to save the world have been corrupted and have been interpreted different ways throughout the people in history through his loop of time traveling. I was just trying to figure out if it was something I missed and all that. But I think that kind of wraps it up. How the confusion could have happened throughout the course of history. And there was a point I wanted to make. I just kind of lost it in going deeper down the rabbit hole of this time traveling thing. But I think that makes probably the most sense. I think the sad part in the entire story is that Bran will have to end up dying in that timeline in that cave, or either there's a new version, maybe the one where he has to actually, him and the Night King have to die at the same time, or or when he or the Night King, in order to kill the Night King, you have to just Bran has to die, and maybe he already knows that, or maybe he figures it out. Maybe he would have got that information had the Three-Eyed Raven had time to get him all the information he needed. So, not sure about how they're going to deal with that part, but very interesting. That's my idea of how he became these people, and how they confused him throughout the voices, throughout history with the fire. I still think it was something I missed, but I'm going to stop right there. If I remember it, I will talk about it in a later episode. But guys, that's all I want to say. If you like content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and until next time, take care, guys.